Tonight, we're turning our attention to something many dog owners have watched happen and never fully understood. How can you help a dog stay calm during thunder or fireworks? If you've ever held a trembling dog through a summer storm, wondering what they were actually sensing, that you couldn't, that instinct was correct. It was never really about the sound. Welcome to Sleepy Animal Channel. Wherever you are right now, settling into whatever stillness the evening allows, let yourself sink into a body at rest. We'll move through 100 relaxing facts about how dogs sense and survive a storm. From the trembling in a hallway closet, to the static gathering unseen in the air, to the quiet science of a nervous system, tuned to a world humans can barely perceive. Feel the stillness of a room where a dog already senses what you don't. Air changing, pressure shifting, long before any sound. Let that quiet awareness settle into you now. A dog lies pressed flat against the hallway floor, ears pinned back, tail tucked so tightly it disappears beneath the body. And there is no thunder yet, no lightning, not even a cloud visible through the window. Veterinary behaviorists call this anticipatory storm anxiety, a documented response in which dogs react to a storm's approach well before any person in the room notices a change. This is the quiet mystery at the center of tonight's journey. What does a dog actually sense during a storm? And how can you help that fear soften into calm? Research from canine behavior clinics estimates that between 1/4 and 1/2 of dogs show measurable storm-related distress at some point in their lives, making it one of the most common fear responses reported to veterinarians. The pacing, the panting, the trembling, these are not overreactions. They are a body responding accurately to information arriving through channels we don't have access to. You may have once assumed your dog was simply startled by noise, the same way a person jumps at a slammed door. Something in you may have quietly wondered if your dog knew something you didn't. A dog paces from the kitchen to the front door and back again, nails clicking against the floor in a rhythm that has no clear destination. This restless movement is one of the earliest visible signs of storm anxiety, often appearing minutes to hours before a storm actually arrives. Behavioral researchers note that pacing serves as a discharge mechanism, a way for a body flooded with stress hormones to metabolize that arousal through motion rather than stillness. Cortisol and adrenaline rise sharply in anxious dogs during storm anticipation, priming muscles for movement, whether or not there is anywhere useful to go. Unlike a dog pacing before a walk, which is directional and eager, storm pacing is aimless, repetitive, without clear reward at the end of it. You may recognize this same restlessness in yourself on a night when worry keeps you moving from room to room, unable to settle, even though there is nothing productive left to do. A dog presses its body against a closet wall, wedging itself into the narrowest gap it can find. Sometimes behind a toilet or beneath a bed frame it can barely fit under. This behavior, often called denning, reflects an instinct to seek enclosed, pressure-providing spaces during high arousal states. Veterinary ethologists suggest that tight spaces may offer a sensation similar to swaddling, providing consistent physical pressure that can have a mild calming effect on the nervous system. Some dogs seek out bathtubs, specifically, likely because the enclosed porcelain shape muffles sound, and may also feel cooler and more stable underfoot during barometric shifts. This same principle underlies the design of pressure wrap vests marketed for anxious dogs. There is something recognizable in choosing the smallest, most enclosed space available when the world outside feels too large to manage. The instinct to make yourself smaller until the feeling passes. A dog's sides heave in rapid, shallow pants, even though the room is cool and no exercise has occurred in hours. Panting under these conditions is not about temperature regulation. It is a visible marker of the sympathetic nervous system's fight or flight activation, the same system that governs a racing heart and dry mouth. Heart rate in storm-anxious dogs has been recorded rising well above resting baseline during the anticipatory phase, before a single thunderclap sounds. This means the physiological storm inside the dog's body often outpaces the actual storm outside. Excessive drooling frequently accompanies the panting, another byproduct of the same stress response. It is worth noticing that a body can enter full alarm mode based on information alone, without a single threatening thing having actually happened, yet a pattern familiar to anyone whose own heart has raced before the bad news even arrived. A dog trembles in fine, continuous shivers, not the deep shudder of cold, but a tighter, higher frequency tremor that seems to move through the entire body at once. This shaking is a direct muscular expression of adrenaline, the hormone responsible for preparing the body for sudden action that, in this case, has nowhere to go. Some dogs shake themselves nearly continuously through an entire storm, expending real physical energy on a threat that never physically arrives. Researchers studying canine fear responses note that trembling often persists even after the storm itself has passed, taking anywhere from 20 minutes to several hours to fully resolve as stress hormones clear from the bloodstream. The body, in other words, keeps responding to the storm long after the sky has cleared. A lag between the event ending and the nervous system believing it is truly over. A dog's ears sit unusually erect and mobile, swiveling independently toward sounds no human in the room can detect, sometimes minutes before the first audible rumble arrives outdoors. Canine hearing extends up to roughly 45,000 Hz, compared to the human ceiling of about 20,000 Hz. And dogs can also detect sounds at far lower volumes than people can. This means a dog is not reacting to the same storm a person hears. It is reacting to an earlier, quieter, more distant version of that storm, arriving through a sensory channel already tuned finer than ours. The ears working independently, rotating like small satellite dishes, allow a dog to triangulate the direction of a sound with a precision no human ear can match. This raises the central question of tonight more sharply. if the dog's alarm begins before the storm is even audible to us? What exactly is triggering it? And what would it take to interrupt that alarm at its true source, rather than only after it has already taken hold? A dog stops mid-play, head lifting, the body suddenly rigid, the attention pulled toward a spot on the horizon no thunderhead has yet reached. Some behaviorists propose that dogs may detect distant thunder as infrasound, extremely low-frequency vibration, below 20 Hz, at the very edge or beyond human hearing altogether. Infrasound can travel extraordinary distances through the atmosphere, with minimal loss of energy, meaning a storm system many miles away could, in principle, already be broadcasting a signal a dog's body can register as vibration before any sound is consciously heard. This would explain why some dogs seem to react to storms that a weather app has not yet flagged as approaching. It also reframes what looks like sudden fear as something closer to a distant early warning system. The dog's body picking up on ripples from an event still forming somewhere over the horizon. A dog's nose lifts and works rapidly at the air, nostrils flaring, well before any rain has begun to fall on the ground outside. Storms are frequently preceded by a distinctive scent produced when rain interacts with soil, plants, and the atmosphere, a compound called petrichor, along with ozone, generated by developing electrical activity in storm clouds. A dog's sense of smell is estimated to be tens of thousands of times more sensitive than a human's, built on roughly 300 million scent receptors compared to a person's 6 million. This means the ozone and pre-rain scent markers that a person might never consciously notice, even standing outdoors, can register clearly and early to a dog indoors with the windows closed. The storm, quite literally, has a smell that arrives before it does, and a dog's nose is built to read it as a warning. A dog's fur stands very slightly on end along the back and shoulders. A subtle change easy to miss unless you happen to be running a hand along that exact spot. This may relate to one of the more debated but consistently observed aspects of canine storm sensitivity: the build-up of static electricity in the atmosphere and on the ground as a storm approaches. Some researchers propose that dogs can feel this static charge directly through their fur and skin, particularly along fur that stands away from the body, creating an uncomfortable tingling sensation similar to the static shock a person feels touching a doorknob after walking across carpet. This sensation, unlike a sound or a smell, would be felt continuously and directly on the skin, offering no way to look away or block it out. If true, it suggests a dog experiencing a storm is not just hearing or smelling something distant. It may be wearing the storm's early effects on its own body. A dog whines softly near its owner's leg, glancing repeatedly toward the window, then toward the owner's face, then back to the window again. This behavior, checking a trusted person's reaction before deciding how alarmed to be, is called social referencing, and it has been documented extensively in dogs raised alongside humans. It suggests that a dog's storm response is not purely a fixed biological reflex. It is also shaped moment to moment, by the emotional signals of the people around it. Underneath every fact tonight sits one quiet question worth carrying forward. If the dog's fear begins with signals arriving through senses sharper than ours, pressure, static, infrasound, scent, then what does calm actually require? Not simply removing a sound, but understanding an entire sensory experience most of us have never had to notice. A dog that reacts strongly to fireworks may remain almost entirely relaxed through an actual thunderstorm, or the reverse, deeply distressed by thunder, yet indifferent to a fireworks display down the street. This distinction matters more than it first appears. Veterinary behaviorists separate noise phobia, a fear triggered specifically by sound intensity and unpredictability, from true storm phobia, a broader fear response triggered by the full sensory profile of a storm. Barometric pressure drops, static buildup, darkening light, and changing air pressure, sound being only one part of a larger pattern. A dog with pure noise phobia startles at the bang and settles once it's quiet again. A dog with storm phobia may begin showing distress hours before any sound occurs at all, and remain unsettled well after the last rumble fades, because the trigger was never only the noise to begin with. A dog that seems calm during a passing rain shower may become deeply distressed only when thunder accompanies it. Evidence that sound alone, particularly unpredictable, high-intensity sound, can independently trigger fear separate from any weather-related sensory cues. Sudden loud noises activate the amygdala, the brain's alarm processing center, almost instantly and before conscious thought can intervene. In dogs, just as in humans. What makes thunder especially difficult to adapt to is its unpredictability. The interval, volume, and suddenness vary every time, denying the nervous system the chance to learn a reliable pattern. Fireworks share this same unpredictability, often arriving in the dark. Without the visual warning clouds can sometimes provide. A sound with no rhythm and no way to anticipate its timing is, by nature, harder for any nervous system to make peace with. A dog first flinches at a summer storm not as a puppy but for the first time as a fully grown adult, months or years after showing no prior signs of storm sensitivity at all. Storm phobia frequently emerges or worsens with age rather than being present from birth, and researchers propose several contributing factors. A single frightening storm experience, creating a lasting association. Gradual sensitization, where repeated storm exposure builds fear over time rather than reducing it. And age-related changes in the nervous system's capacity to regulate stress. This pattern means storm fear is rarely a fixed trait. A dog either has or doesn't. It is often a response that develops, shifts, and can be reshaped, which matters directly for the central question of what it takes to help a dog find calm, because a learned pattern is also a pattern that can be gently unlearned. Two dogs of the same breed, raised in similar households, respond to the identical storm in entirely different ways. One, sleeping through it undisturbed. The other trembling by the door. Herding breeds such as Border Collies and Australian Shepherds, along with certain hound breeds, are frequently reported by veterinary behaviorists as showing higher rates of noise and storm sensitivity, though breed alone never fully predicts an individual dog's response. Herding breeds in particular were bred over generations for heightened environmental awareness and reactivity to subtle stimuli, traits useful for reading livestock and terrain, but which may also lower the threshold for storm-related alarm. Early life experience, individual temperament, and even the storm behavior of a dog's own mother during her pregnancy or the puppy's early weeks appear to shape adult sensitivity as much as genetics alone. A rescue dog with an unknown history flinches violently at every distant rumble, while a dog raised calmly from puppyhood in the same home barely lifts its head. Early socialization during the sensitive period of roughly 3 to 14 weeks of age plays a measurable role in how a dog's nervous system calibrates its baseline sense of safety around novel or intense stimuli. Puppies gently and gradually exposed to a range of sounds during this window, including recorded thunder at low volume, often develop greater resilience to storm-related noise later in life. Puppies who experience a single frightening, uncontrolled, loud event during this same sensitive period, by contrast, may develop a lasting fear response from that one occurrence alone. The nervous system, in its earliest weeks, is quietly deciding what counts as dangerous, a decision that then echoes for years afterward. A dog's pupils dilate to nearly fill the iris in a room with perfectly normal lighting, the whites of the eyes becoming visible along the edges in what handlers call whale eye. This is a well-documented visual marker of acute stress in dogs, driven by the same sympathetic nervous system activation responsible for the panting and trembling already described. Alongside dilated pupils, a stressed dog's body often shows lowered head carriage, a tucked tail, and lip licking unrelated to food. A full-body vocabulary of distress that experienced handlers learn to read before more obvious signs like pacing even begin. Recognizing these early microsignals matters directly for anyone hoping to intervene before a dog's fear escalates to full-blown panic. Because comfort offered at the first flicker of unease is far more effective than comfort offered once trembling has already taken hold. A dog hides beneath a bed for the full duration of a storm, only to emerge afterward, seeming subdued, slow to eat, reluctant to engage in normal play for the rest of the day. This lingering flatness reflects the after-effects of a prolonged stress response. Elevated cortisol can remain in a dog's system for hours after the triggering event ends, continuing to influence mood, appetite, and energy well past the storm itself. Some veterinary behaviorists describe this as a stress hangover, a period during which the body is still metabolizing the hormonal surge triggered by fear. This detail matters for understanding recovery, not just reaction. A dog that seems fine the moment thunder stops may still be working through the physiological aftermath for the rest of that day, deserving the same gentleness afterward as during. A dog scratches obsessively at a door or windowsill during a storm, sometimes damaging the wood or carpet in an apparent attempt to escape the room entirely. This escape-driven behavior, sometimes severe enough to be classified as a panic response rather than simple anxiety, reflects a nervous system that has moved past manageable arousal into full flight response. Even though there is no actual danger to flee from, and often nowhere to go. In documented severe cases, dogs have broken through screen doors or window glass during extreme storm panic, occasionally resulting in serious injury. This extreme end of the spectrum underscores why storm anxiety is treated as a genuine welfare concern by veterinarians rather than a minor quirk. The fear, when severe enough, carries real physical risk alongside the emotional distress. A dog's heart rate, measured by veterinary researchers using portable monitors during simulated thunderstorm playback, rises well above its resting rate within moments of the first recorded rumble. Even in a controlled lab setting where no actual storm exists. Studies using recorded thunder sounds have shown that dogs with diagnosed noise phobia display significantly greater increases in heart rate and cortisol compared to non-phobic dogs exposed to the identical sound at the identical volume. This confirms that the fear response is not simply learned behavior performed for an audience. It is a measurable, involuntary physiological event happening inside the body, regardless of whether anyone is present to witness it. The trembling dog alone in an empty house is undergoing the same internal storm as the one pressed against its owner's leg. A dog's blood, drawn by researchers before and after a recorded thunderstorm playback session, shows a marked spike in cortisol concentration in samples taken minutes after the sound exposure begins. Cortisol, often called the primary stress hormone, prepares the body for perceived danger by increasing blood sugar, sharpening alertness, and suppressing non-essential functions like digestion, useful for a genuine threat, exhausting when triggered repeatedly by a recurring seasonal event with no actual danger attached. Chronic. Repeated activation of this stress pathway across many storms in a season has been associated in veterinary literature with broader impacts on a dog's overall well-being, including disrupted sleep patterns and reduced appetite during storm-heavy periods. The body pays a real cost for treating a passing weather event as a recurring emergency, season after season. A dog that has weathered dozens of storms across several years shows no sign of habituating to them. If anything, its reaction to the 20th storm is more intense than its reaction to the first. This pattern, called sensitization, runs counter to how fear typically fades with repeated safe exposure. And it is one of the more counterintuitive findings in canine storm research. Rather than learning, "This happens, and I'm fine," some dogs, instead, learn "This keeps happening, and I was right to be afraid." Each storm reinforcing rather than diminishing the association. Understanding this shift matters directly for the central question guiding tonight's journey. It means storm anxiety, left unaddressed, tends to worsen with time rather than resolve on its own. And it also means that when the right kind of gentle intervention finally does arrive, it is countering years of built-up pattern rather than a fresh, simple fear. A dog trembles through a storm despite being indoors. Dry, warm, and physically completely safe. Every rational condition for safety already met, and still the fear persists in full. This gap between actual safety and felt safety lies at the heart of what makes storm anxiety so difficult to reason a dog out of. Comfort measures like calm, verbal reassurance, physical touch, and a stable, predictable environment do not eliminate the sensory information still arriving. The falling pressure, the static, the infrasound. But research on canine stress regulation suggests that a calm human presence can measurably lower a dog's physiological arousal, even when the underlying trigger remains fully active. Safety, in other words, is something that has to be felt at the level the fear was created, not just reasoned about after the fact. A dog stretches out fully on the floor for the first time in hours, sides finally moving in a slow, even rhythm rather than the rapid pant of moments before, as the last distant rumble fades from a storm that has now passed well beyond hearing. What softened in that body was never something that had to be forced. It moved, on its own timeline, once the pressure eased and the air went still again. The question that opened this act, how do you actually help a dog find calm, is beginning to turn on itself. Perhaps calm was never something to manufacture from nothing, but something that returns once the sensory flood the dog was navigating finally recedes. The next stretch of this journey follows that returning stillness more closely into the mechanisms and the science behind exactly what a dog's body was tracking all along. A dog rests its head across a person's lap in the quiet that follows a storm, breathing slow, eyes half closed, present in a way it could not manage even 20 minutes earlier. There is a particular kind of settling that only arrives after a body has been fully activated and then, finally, allowed to stand down. Not the absence of ever having been afraid, but the completion of a cycle the nervous system needed to run its full course. This moment of settling is itself instructive. It shows that the goal was never to prevent the dog from ever sensing a storm at all, since so much of that sensing happens through channels beyond anyone's control, but to shorten the distance between alarm and safety once the sensing begins. A dog sleeps deeply that same night, storm long past, breathing steady, legs occasionally twitching in a dream that has nothing whatsoever to do with thunder at all. Here is what this first stretch of facts has been quietly building toward. The shaking, the pacing, the hiding were never a dog overreacting to nothing. They were an accurate report from a body wired to sense pressure, static charge, and sound at a resolution far beyond ordinary human range, arriving as fear only because there was no way. Yet, to translate that sensing into felt safety, that translation is where this journey goes next. That pressure the dog's body was tracking all evening has already begun to lift, easing on its own, asking nothing further of you or of it. The question we opened with, "How do you help that fear settle?" is starting to turn. Maybe calm was never something you had to build from scratch, only something waiting to return once the sensing quiets down. Let your own shoulders drop the way that trembling finally did, unclenching without instruction. Notice your breath slowing to match a rhythm this steady. What comes next follows that same softening, deeper into what the body already knew. If you're finding a little of that same stillness settling into you right now, let it stay. There's more of this quiet science waiting whenever you're ready for it. But for now, there's nothing left to do but rest. A dog lifts its nose toward a window long before any human notices a change in the weather, ears swiveling independently to sweep the air for a signal. This is the beginning of auditory scanning, a behavior tied to the dog's exceptional hearing range, which stretches from around 67 Hz up to 45,000 Hz, far beyond the roughly 20,000 Hz ceiling of human hearing. Storms generate low-frequency rumbles and infrasound, sound below 20 Hz, that travel for miles ahead of visible lightning. A dog's ear structure, with its mobile pinna and dense inner ear receptors, is built to catch these faint, distant vibrations that a person standing in the same room would never register. What looks like restlessness is really perception arriving early. You have likely felt a similar quiet alertness, a sense that something is shifting in a room before you could name what it was. A dog paces near the back door, then circles once before lying down again, unable to settle into any single spot. Researchers studying storm-related anxiety describe this as a hypervigilance pattern, where the nervous system stays primed for a threat it cannot yet see. The behavior often begins 30 minutes to several hours before a storm becomes audible to humans, which lines up with how far infrasound and distant thunder can travel through the atmosphere. Dogs with more sensitive hearing, including many herding and hound breeds, tend to show this pacing earlier and more intensely than breeds with less acute auditory ranges. It resembles the way a person might reorganize a desk or check a phone repeatedly while waiting for uncertain news, the body needing to move because the mind cannot yet resolve what is coming. Just before a storm arrives, the dog's fur sometimes stands up faintly along the back, even without direct contact with anything charged. Atmospheric electricity builds steadily in the hours before a thunderstorm. As the ground and the air develop, opposing charges beneath developing storm clouds, a dog's coat, especially in breeds with dense or double fur, can accumulate a light static charge from this shifting electrical field, similar to how a wool sweater gathers charge in dry air. Some behaviorists suggest dogs can feel this faint tingling across their skin, though the exact sensory threshold is still being studied. It is a small, mostly invisible signal, but for an animal whose senses run at a finer resolution than ours, it may be enough to register as unmistakably different from an ordinary day. You may recall the odd, prickling feeling of hair rising on your own arm just before a storm, a private hint that the air itself had changed. A dog that was calm all afternoon suddenly presses its body against a person's legs, seeking contact rather than distance. This shift toward proximity seeking is a well-documented response in canine behavioral studies, especially as barometric pressure begins to drop ahead of an incoming storm system. Atmospheric pressure can fall several millibars in the hours before a storm, and dogs appear sensitive to these subtle shifts through pressure receptors that may be linked to the inner ear and sinus cavities. Lower pressure is also associated with changes in scent dispersal, since falling pressure allows more airborne particles and odor molecules to travel closer to the ground, effectively changing what a dog can smell in real time. The pressing close behavior is not simple neediness. It is a dog using a trusted body as an anchor point, while its internal compass registers unfamiliar readings. Most people recognize this instinct too, the pull to stand nearer to someone steady when the environment feels uncertain. A group of dogs in the same household often begins reacting to an approaching storm within minutes of one another, even when they are in separate rooms. Ethologists studying group-living canines note that anxiety states can spread quickly among dogs through a combination of scent cues, body posture, and vocal signals like low whines or short barks. One dog's rising cortisol, the hormone most associated with stress response, appears to trigger physiological arousal in nearby dogs, a phenomenon sometimes called emotional contagion in animal behavior research. This means that a single sensitive dog can effectively function as an early warning system for an entire household of animals. The pattern echoes something familiar in human groups as well, where one person's visible unease in a quiet room can shift the mood of everyone else present without a single word being spoken. During a distant storm, a dog's heart rate can climb noticeably even though no thunder is yet audible to the people around it. Veterinary studies using heart rate monitors on storm-sensitive dogs have recorded increases of 20 to 40 beats per minute during the anticipatory phase, before the first clear thunderclap. This response begins in the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure deep in the brain that processes threat detection across nearly all mammals, including dogs and humans. Once the amygdala flags a stimulus as potentially threatening, it signals the adrenal glands to release cortisol and adrenaline, preparing the body for action, even when no action is yet required. In dogs, this circuitry activates especially fast because their auditory and pressure-sensing systems feed information to the amygdala earlier than a human's comparatively duller senses would allow. It is the same ancient alarm system that quickens a person's pulse when a hallway suddenly goes silent in an unfamiliar house. A dog trembling on a bed during a storm is not simply frightened in a vague sense. Its body is running a specific, measurable stress response. Blood tests taken from dogs during thunderstorms show elevated cortisol levels that can remain raised for several hours after the storm has fully passed, meaning the nervous system takes time to stand down, even once the sound and pressure changes have stopped. This delayed recovery is common across mammals with a strong stress response, since cortisol is designed to linger briefly in case a threat returns. Trembling itself often serves a physical purpose, generating small amounts of muscular heat and helping metabolize the stress hormones circulating in the bloodstream. Understanding this changes how the trembling reads. Not simple panic, but a body doing exactly what stress physiology evolved to do. Many people recognize this same lingering unease after a genuine scare, long after the moment of danger has clearly ended. A dog hides beneath a table or inside a closet during a storm, choosing small, enclosed spaces over open rooms. Behavioral researchers link this to denning instinct, a preference inherited from wild canine ancestors who used burrows and enclosed dens for safety and temperature regulation. Enclosed spaces reduce the surface area, exposed to sound waves, and can dampen the perceived intensity of thunder, while also limiting the dog's exposure to flashes of lightning that might further trigger the visual startle reflex. Some trainers now recommend structured den-like spaces, sometimes called thundershirts or safe zones, specifically because they mimic this instinct in a controlled, comforting way. The behavior is less about escape and more about seeking a boundary the body can feel enclosed by. It resembles the very human urge to pull a blanket close during an unsettling night, using contact and containment to feel less exposed. A dog's ears fold back and its tail tucks low the moment the barometric pressure drops sharply, well before any lightning is visible on the horizon. This combination of ear and tail posture is part of a broader canine body language system that communicates internal state clearly to other dogs. And researchers studying interspecies communication note that humans can learn to read it just as reliably. Pressure drops of this kind often precede severe weather by 30 minutes or more, giving dogs a genuine head start on detecting incoming storms compared to most weather instruments available to the average household. Some working and herding breeds, selected over generations for environmental awareness, show this postural shift even earlier than companion breeds. The tucked tail and flattened ears are not random fear behaviors. They are a coordinated physiological response tuned by pressure to sensitive tissue. You may know the sensation of your own ears popping on a descending flight, a small reminder that pressure changes register directly in the body, not just in the mind. As a storm approaches, a dog may suddenly refuse food it would normally eat eagerly, turning its head away from a full bowl. Appetite suppression under stress is a well-established physiological pattern, since the sympathetic nervous system prioritizes blood flow to muscles and sensory organs over digestion when the body perceives potential danger. This is the same fight-or-flight circuitry that diverts resources away from the stomach in nearly every mammal facing a stress trigger, whether the threat is real or anticipated. In dogs sensitive to storms, this appetite change can appear hours before any audible thunder, driven purely by the pressure and static shifts building in the atmosphere. once the storm passes and cortisol levels begin to normalize. Appetite typically returns within a few hours. It is a familiar pattern for anyone who has lost interest in a meal during a period of genuine worry. The body simply reallocating its attention elsewhere. A dog that normally sleeps through minor household noise will startle awake at the first distant rumble of thunder, sitting upright within seconds. This rapid arousal from rest reflects how deeply integrated the auditory startle reflex is with a dog's sleep architecture, allowing even a resting brain to process incoming low-frequency sound without fully waking every other system first. Sleep researchers studying canine brain activity have found that dogs cycle through lighter sleep stages more frequently than humans, which may make it easier for an external sound to interrupt rest quickly, rather than requiring a long climb back to full alertness. This vigilance likely served wild canine ancestors well, allowing pack members to respond immediately to approaching threats even while resting. The trait persists in domestic dogs largely intact, attuned now to storms rather than predators. Most people know the jarring feeling of being pulled from sleep by an unexpected sound, the body reacting before the mind has fully caught up. A dog that has lived through several severe storm seasons may begin reacting more intensely to milder storms over time, rather than growing used to them. This pattern, known as sensitization, differs from habituation and has been observed in multiple studies of noise-averse dogs, particularly those exposed to unpredictable, high-intensity events like fireworks or severe thunderstorms. Each strong storm appears to reinforce the amygdala's threat association, rather than teach the nervous system that the sound is ultimately harmless. Veterinary behaviorists note that early, gentle exposure and reassurance can sometimes prevent this escalation, while repeated unmanaged exposure to intense storms tends to deepen it. This explains why some older dogs seem more anxious during storms than they were as puppies, a shift that surprises many owners who expected the opposite. It mirrors the way certain sounds from a difficult period in a person's life can become more, not less, unsettling with each repetition. A dog's whiskers, particularly the long ones above the eyes and along the muzzle, twitch subtly in the charged air before a storm breaks. These specialized hairs, called vibrissae, are deeply rooted in nerve-rich follicles and are capable of detecting minute changes in air current and static charge around the dog's face. As atmospheric electricity builds ahead of a storm, the surrounding air itself shifts in subtle ways that vibrissae are uniquely equipped to register, functioning almost like a fine-tuned antenna. This sensory channel operates entirely separately from hearing, meaning a dog can be picking up storm signals through its whiskers even in an environment too loud or distracting to rely on sound alone. The layering of multiple senses, hearing, pressure receptors, ear skin, and whiskers, helps explain why storm anticipation in dogs often begins so far in advance. It is a quiet reminder that awareness does not depend on any single sense alone, but on many small signals arriving together. A dog seeks out a bathroom or basement during a storm more often than any other room in the house. a pattern noted repeatedly by veterinary behaviorists reviewing owner reports. These spaces tend to have fewer windows, more enclosed walls, and often sit lower in the structure, which dampens both sound transmission and the visual flash of lightning. Reduced window exposure also lessens the sudden light changes that can trigger a secondary startle response layered on top of the auditory one. Some behaviorists suggest the tile or concrete flooring common in these rooms may feel cooler and more grounding to a dog already running a heightened stress response. Over time, a dog may learn to associate a specific safe room with relief, moving there proactively once the earliest pressure or static cues appear. It resembles the way a person might instinctively retreat to the quietest room in a house during an overwhelming moment, choosing stillness over stimulation. As the first real thunderclap finally sounds, a dog that has been pacing for an hour may suddenly go still, pressing flat against the floor. This freeze response, distinct from the earlier pacing and hiding, is governed by the same amygdala-driven circuitry, now shifting from anticipatory vigilance into acute threat response, a pattern shared broadly across mammals under sudden acoustic stress. What began as faint infrasound picked up by finely tuned ears, followed by shifting pressure sensed through the sinuses and inner ear, then static gathering visibly in the fur, and finally subtle signals caught by the whiskers, has now converged into a single, unmistakable moment the dog's whole body responds to at once. This is the central answer taking shape. The dog was never simply reacting to noise, but to a layered chain of sensory evidence that started long before any thunder was heard. Staying calm for a dog during a storm means understanding that its fear began earlier and quieter than the sound that finally announced it. You may recognize this same sensation, the strange calm before the drop stillness that arrives right as something long anticipated finally happens. Before we continue, it's worth sitting with the central question again. How can you help a dog stay calm during thunder or fireworks? What you've just seen is that the fear starts in the sensing, not the sound, in ears tuned far past human range, in pressure felt through the sinuses, in fur and whiskers reading a charged sky. The dog beside you is not exaggerating. It has simply already heard what the rest of the room has not yet noticed. A dog presses itself into the narrow gap behind the couch, back legs tucked, chin flat against the floor, as the first low rumble rolls across the sky. Researchers call this space-seeking behavior, and it draws directly on the ancestral den instinct, still wired into the domestic dog's brain. Wolves and wild canids retreat to enclosed dens, not just to sleep, but to regulate arousal. A tight, covered space limits visual stimulation and reduces the surface area exposed to sound and vibration. In a thunderstorm, that enclosed geometry does something else too. It dampens the electric field building in the room. Since a low, covered spot is farther from exposed, elevated surfaces where charge tends to gather. The dog is not hiding from you. It is doing what its body has always known how to do when the air itself feels unsafe. You have likely felt that same pull toward the closed room, when the world outside felt too loud to face directly. Long before the thunder cracks, a dog's coat may already be humming with static electricity, each hair holding a faint charge that did not exist an hour earlier. Atmospheric physicists describe the period before a storm as a time when the local electric field intensifies, sometimes reaching several thousand volts per meter near the ground. A dog's fur, especially double coats bred for insulation, holds charge efficiently because individual hairs are poor conductors and readily separate from one another, similar to how a wool sweater crackles in dry winter air. As the storm approaches, that ambient charge transfers onto the coat through the same triboelectric process that makes a balloon stick to a wall. The sensation likely feels less like pain and more like a persistent, low-grade prickling across the skin. This is the same faint, electric unease you might notice on your own arms just before a storm breaks, when the hair on your skin seems to lift on its own. A dog paces the hallway in tight loops, ears pinned back, tail low, long before any person in the house has heard a single rumble. Veterinary behaviorists studying storm phobia have documented dogs reacting up to 30 minutes before audible thunder, which points to a sensory channel beyond hearing alone. Barometric pressure typically begins falling several hours ahead of a storm system, and dogs are believed to detect this shift through pressure-sensitive tissue in the inner ear and sinuses, structures shared broadly across mammals. Combined with the rising static charge in the coat, the dog is essentially reading two separate physical signals that humans cannot consciously perceive at all. This dual sensitivity explains why some dogs seem to predict storms with unsettling accuracy, hours before any visible cloud cover appears. You may recognize this in the ache some people describe in their joints before rain. A body responding to pressure, changes, the mind was never trained to name. The moment the static charge peaks, a dog often begins shaking its body from head to tail. The same full-body shudder used after a bath, but with no water involved at all. Physiologists studying canine stress responses suggest this shake serves a dual purpose during storms. It may help dissipate some surface static, while also releasing muscular tension accumulated during the anticipatory build-up. This is the same wet dog shake reflex. A rapid oscillation research has measured at up to 8 cycles per second, generating enough centrifugal force to fling water or, in this case, disperse the surface, charge unevenly built across the coat. What began as a way to dry off has apparently been repurposed by the nervous system as a release valve under electrical stress. The behavior rarely resolves the anxiety fully, since the underlying pressure drop and field intensity continue to build. It resembles the way a person might roll their shoulders or exhale sharply, not because the stress is gone, but because the body needs somewhere to put it. A dog's anticipatory anxiety does not arrive all at once. It builds in a slow, escalating loop. Each small sign of the coming storm reinforcing the last until the animal is fully activated before a drop of rain falls. Behavioral scientists describe this as a classical conditioning cascade, where a dog begins associating early, subtle cues, a change in light, a shift in household routine, a faint drop in pressure, with the more intense stimuli to come. Each cue triggers a small release of cortisol and adrenaline, and because the dog cannot reason its way out of the response, the arousal simply accumulates rather than resetting. Over repeated storms, some dogs generalize the fear further, reacting to darkening skies or even the sound of wind alone. This creates a feedback loop where the anticipation itself becomes almost as taxing as the storm. It mirrors the particular exhaustion of waiting for bad news you can feel coming but cannot yet name or stop. Once thoroughly frightened, a dog will often seek out a bathroom, closet, or basement corner over any other space in the house, even one it has never previously shown interest in. Animal behaviorists note that these choices are not random. Bathrooms and interior closets tend to have fewer windows, more surrounding walls, and often plumbing or metal fixtures that can subtly ground ambient static, making the space measurably calmer in electrical terms. Interior rooms also block more outdoor sound and light, softening both the auditory and visual signals of the storm simultaneously. This preference echoes the den-seeking instinct of wild canid ancestors who chose enclosed, defensible spaces during exactly this kind of environmental unpredictability. The instinct is not learned from a single bad storm. It appears to be part of the dog's original behavioral inheritance. It is not unlike the specific comfort of a small room with the door closed, when everything outside feels too big to process at once. This same physics is exactly why a snugly fitted wrap around a dog's torso can measurably calm a storm-anxious animal within minutes of being applied. Veterinary researchers examining these compression garments have proposed two overlapping mechanisms. Gentle, constant pressure on the torso appears to activate calming touch receptors similar to swaddling in human infants, while the snug fabric also provides a layer that reduces static buildup directly on the fur beneath it. A small clinical study measuring heart rate variability found that dogs wearing such wraps during simulated storm sounds showed lower physiological arousal than dogs without one. The effect is not universal, and some dogs show no measurable change, which suggests individual variation in how much of the anxiety is static-driven versus sound-driven. Still, the consistency of calming pressure appears to interrupt at least one link in the anticipatory loop before it fully escalates. It is the same relief many people feel under a weighted blanket when steady pressure quiets a mind that would otherwise keep circling. A dog trembling through its first few real thunderstorms as a puppy is in a very real sense, learning the shape of an unpredictable world for the first time, and that early experience can calibrate its fear response for years afterward. Developmental behaviorists have found that puppies exposed to loud, unpredictable stimuli during key sensitive periods, roughly 8 to 16 weeks of age, often carry either heightened sensitivity or resilience into adulthood. Much depends on how those early exposures were managed. A puppy comforted calmly during a storm, without excessive coddling that might reinforce fear, tends to develop steadier coping patterns. This holds true compared to one left entirely alone, or one whose owner reacts with visible panic. This means the earliest storms a dog experiences are not just isolated events. They are formative templates for how its nervous system will interpret every future one. The vulnerability is highest precisely when the dog has the least life experience to draw on. It is the same tender window in which any of us first learn whether the world responds to fear with steadiness or with more fear. Somewhere tonight, a young dog is learning for the first time that a loud sky does not mean the world has ended, that steadiness nearby is what turns fear into something survivable. That lesson settles into the body, quietly available for every storm still to come. You do not have to be young to learn it again. Whatever in you is still bracing for a sound that hasn't come can borrow a little of that same steadiness now. Let your own shoulders lower the way a trembling puppy's finally do. Once it learns, the world nearby is safe. There is nothing left to brace against. Only a quiet, steady presence, asking nothing more of you than to rest. As the storm reaches full intensity, a dog's ears rotate almost continuously, each one independently tracking sound with up to 18 distinct muscles working to funnel and localize the noise. This independent ear mobility allows a dog to detect the direction of a thunderclap far more precisely than a human ever could. But during a storm, this same sensitivity becomes a liability. There is no single direction to retreat from when the threat feels like it surrounds the entire house. Acoustic studies suggest that thunder's low-frequency rumble, often below 50 Hz, travels through walls and floors with little loss of intensity. This means a dog cannot outrun the sound by changing rooms the way it might avoid a visible threat. Combined with the static charge already prickling its coat, the dog experiences the storm as an inescapable, whole-body event rather than a distant disturbance. This is part of why simply closing a window rarely resolves the anxiety on its own. It is the particular helplessness of a threat that seems to come from everywhere at once, with no clear direction to turn towards safety. And yet, within minutes of the last rumble fading and the pressure beginning to normalize, a storm-anxious dog will often walk calmly back out from its hiding place, shake once more, and settle into an ordinary nap as though nothing extraordinary happened at all. Physiologists note that once barometric pressure stabilizes and the atmospheric charge dissipates, the sensory inputs driving the anxiety disappear almost as quickly as they arrived, allowing cortisol levels to fall back toward baseline within a relatively short window. This rapid return to equilibrium reveals something notable about the mechanism at work. The fear was never a flaw in the dog's temperament, but a precise, proportionate response to a real and measurable physical event moving through its environment. The The dog does not hold on to the fear once the static and pressure that caused it are gone. Its nervous system simply returns to rest, unburdened by what it just endured. There is something worth noticing in how completely the body can let go once the actual threat has genuinely passed. What looked like a small animal simply overreacting to noise turns out to be a body reading the sky more precisely than any of us can. Charge gathering, pressure falling, long before the first sound arrives. The comfort it goes looking for was never irrational. It was exact. A dog paces from the window to the door, pausing to press her nose against the glass. This restless circuit is called displacement pacing, a coping behavior seen when a dog senses a threat it cannot locate. Pacing burns nervous energy with nowhere else to go. Since the dog cannot outrun static charge building in the air, an owner who introduces a snug wrap, often called a thundershirt, before pacing starts, gives the nervous system something concrete to lean into, interrupting the loop before it builds momentum. Timing the wrap early, at the very first sign of restlessness, matters more than the wrap itself. You have likely wrapped a blanket tighter around yourself, needing your body to feel held. A dog burrows beneath a bed, dragging a pillow along until only his tail is visible. This denning instinct predates domestication, rooted in wild canid ancestors who sought enclosed spaces during storms. Enclosed spaces reduce visual input and muffle sound, lowering the flood of sensory data a frightened dog is trying to process. A safe den, built ahead of storm season, with familiar bedding and a light-blocking cover, gives this instinct somewhere sanctioned to go. Trainers recommend introducing the den on calm days, so it becomes a resting place, not only a panic destination. You may remember pulling a blanket over your head as a child, just to shrink the world down. A dog presses his whole body against his owner's leg the moment thunder cracks, leaning rather than trembling. This contact-seeking behavior activates oxytocin release in both dog and human, a hormone tied to bonding and stress reduction. Researchers studying human-canine interaction have measured oxytocin rising in owners during calm contact with an anxious dog, suggesting the comfort moves both ways. Sitting on the floor at the dog's level, offering steady contact rather than anxious hovering, communicates safety more clearly than words. The dog is not asking to be fixed. He is asking to not be alone in it. You have likely reached for someone's hand in a dark room without needing to explain why. A dog's ears rotate independently toward a rumble long before any human registers, a sound, each one tracking direction on its own. Canine hearing extends to roughly 45,000 Hz, well beyond the 20,000 Hz ceiling of human hearing, with directional sensitivity that pinpoints sound sources precisely. White noise machines exploit this sensitivity by generating a steady, textureless sound bed that masks the erratic peaks of distant thunder. Because the masking sound stays constant, the nervous system has nothing new to startle at, only a continuous hush to settle into. You have likely used a fan or the hum of an air conditioner to blur out noise that would otherwise keep you awake. A dog sniffs at a diffuser plugged into the wall, then settles nearby without being told to. Dog-appeasing pheromone, often sold as DAP, is a synthetic version of the chemical signal a nursing mother releases to calm her puppies. This pheromone is detected through the vomeronasal organ, a structure in the nasal cavity that reads chemical signals separately from ordinary scent. Some trials on shelter dogs have found reduced stress signs when the pheromone is present during fireworks, though individual responses vary. The diffuser does not sedate the dog. It speaks a chemical language older than words. You may have caught a familiar scent and felt your shoulders drop before you knew why. A dog trembles at the first rumble of a storm still 40 miles away, hours before any rain reaches the yard. Barometric pressure begins falling well ahead of a storm's arrival, and dogs appear able to sense this shift through pressure-sensitive tissue in the inner ear and possibly the joints. This early detection explains why a dog often seems anxious on a clear afternoon. Agitation that puzzled owners for generations. Knowing the trigger arrives before the sound allows an owner to begin calming routines, like starting white noise, before stress escalates. You have likely felt a headache building before a storm, your own body registering that same pressure shift. A dog's coat crackles faintly with static as she shakes herself after lying on a rug during a dry, charged afternoon. Thunderstorms generate significant atmospheric electrical charge, and dogs with dense or long coats can accumulate noticeable static buildup as the air ionizes. Some behaviorists hypothesize that this buildup and the small shocks it produces contributes to physical discomfort dogs associate with storms. Separate from the sound, anti-static sprays formulated for pet coats or a slightly damp hand run along the fur beforehand can reduce this charge. You have likely felt a small shock reaching for a doorknob on a dry winter day and flinched at something invisible. A dog freezes mid-stride in the yard, ears pinned, staring at a horizon with no visible cloud, yet present. This anticipatory stillness reflects a nervous system responding to cues humans cannot perceive, including infrasound, low-frequency sound that travels long distances ahead of a storm. Some researchers propose dogs may detect this through bone conduction or specialized receptors in the paw pads. Regardless of the exact channel, the dog's alertness reliably precedes the storm's visible arrival, giving caregivers a narrow window to begin comfort measures before fear compounds. You have likely sensed a shift in a room's mood before anyone spoke, a quiet signal arriving ahead of the words. A dog who once hid under the porch during every storm now lies calmly while a recording of distant thunder plays at low volume nearby. This shift reflects counter-conditioning, pairing a feared sound with something pleasant, like a favored treat, at a volume too low to trigger real fear. Over-repeated, carefully paced sessions the brain gradually reassociates the sound with safety rather than threat, using the same pathways behind all classical conditioning. Veterinary behaviorists caution that starting the volume too high can backfire, deepening the fear instead of easing it. You have likely grown less afraid of something simply by encountering a smaller, safer version of it first. A puppy sleeps through her first thunderstorm without stirring, while an older dog in the same house startles at every distant rumble. Fear responses to loud sounds often intensify with age, tied to accumulated experience and age-related changes in sensory processing. Veterinary studies on noise sensitivity have found onset frequently increases in dogs over 7 years old, even those with no prior storm anxiety. This means a once unbothered dog may need calming tools introduced later that were never necessary before. Recognizing the shift as physiological, not a failure, changes how an owner responds. You may have noticed your own tolerance for noise shifting as the years accumulated, needing more quiet than you once did. A senior dog with cloudy eyes leans heavily into his owner's side during a storm, in a way he never did when younger. Aging dogs often experience decreased hearing and vision, which can heighten anxiety because remaining senses, like feeling pressure change, become the primary source of unsettling information. Cognitive decline. When present, we can also reduce a senior dog's ability to recall that past storms passed without harm. Extra physical contact, familiar routine, and orthopedic bedding all matter more for an older dog whose coping resources have narrowed. You have likely noticed comfort become simpler and more physical as either you or someone you love grows older. A dog trained since puppyhood to associate a specific blanket with calm now settles the instant it appears, regardless of the storm outside. This demonstrates classical conditioning at its most durable, where a neutral object becomes a reliable trigger for calm through repeated pairing with relaxation. The blanket holds no inherent calming property. The nervous system has simply learned the association so thoroughly, the object now works as a shortcut to safety. This conditioned cue can be deliberately built in dogs of any age, with consistent practice during calm moments. You have likely felt your own body soften at the sight of a specific mug or chair, an anchor built slowly, without noticing. A small terrier trembles through an entire storm, while a large mixed-breed dog in the same household barely lifts his head at the same sounds. Breed and individual temperament produce measurable differences in noise sensitivity, with herding and toy breeds appearing overrepresented in studies of noise aversion. Researchers suspect this traces partly to selective breeding for heightened reactivity in herding lines, where quick responsiveness was historically valuable. Genetics is not destiny, since individual dogs within any breed show a wide range of responses, meaning identical strategies may need different intensities. You likely know two people who faced the same stressful event and responded in entirely different ways. Neither response wrong. A dog stands rigid in the center of a room, refusing to move toward an exit even one left open toward a familiar yard. This freezing response occurs when the nervous system perceives a threat as inescapable, triggering physiological shutdown rather than flight. Forcing movement or handling in these moments can heighten distress, since the dog is not being stubborn, but is caught in a genuine survival response. The most effective intervention is often stillness alongside the dog, quiet presence without demand, until the freeze naturally thaws. You have likely stood frozen in a doorway during a moment of shock, unable to complete the simple act of walking through it. A dog, guided through a season of counter-conditioning naps, undisturbed through a storm that once sent her into an hour of frantic pacing. Static charge builds in the air, and barometric pressure falls ahead of every storm, exactly as it always has. Yet her response to that reality has been rewritten from the inside. The question was never whether thunder itself could be controlled, since it cannot, but whether her relationship to what her body senses could change. A nervous system tuned to pressure and charge is not fixed in how it interprets those signals. What shifted was not the storm. It was the meaning her body learned to assign to it. These comfort approaches are general in nature, and a dog whose anxiety is persistent or severe is always best served by a veterinarian or veterinary behaviorist who knows that individual dog. A dog owner loosens a wrap slightly after noticing her dog panting more heavily than usual during a session. Effective use of pressure garments depends on individualized fit, since too loose provides no calming sensation, while too tight can restrict breathing and increase distress. Veterinary guidance generally recommends the wrap allow 2 fingers of space at the chest, snug but not constricting, adjusted for each dog's shape. Monitoring breathing rate and body language after applying any calming tool remains part of using it responsibly. You have likely tightened or loosened a seatbelt or a bandage until it finally felt right rather than just applied. A dog raised with consistent storm routines shows milder anxiety than a littermate rehomed as an adult into a chaotic environment during storm season. Early experience shapes long-term stress reactivity, with researchers pointing to a sensitive period, roughly the first few months of life, that shapes how adaptable a nervous system remains. Puppies gently exposed to low, gentle sounds during this window often develop more resilient responses to noise later. This does not mean an adult dog's fear is unfixable, only that prevention early requires less intervention than treatment later. You likely carry certain calms and certain fears traceable to how steady or unpredictable your own early years were. A dog who receives a favorite chew only during storms now trots toward his crate with visible anticipation the moment the sky darkens. This reverses a negative association, using a reward available exclusively during the feared event, so the storm becomes a predictor of something good rather than only something to fear. This differential reinforcement strategy depends on the reward staying genuinely exclusive to the triggering event, not available at other times. Consistency matters more than the specific reward chosen. Over weeks, anticipation of the reward can outweigh anticipation of the fear. You have likely come to look forward to something you once dreaded. Once something good became reliably attached to it. A dog lies, with all four legs tucked beneath her body, breathing slowly, while thunder sounds every few minutes outside. This posture, called the Sphinx position, reflects a parasympathetic state, the mode tied to rest rather than fight or flight. Heart rate monitors on calm dogs show measurably slower rates in this posture than in pacing or trembling dogs facing the same storm. Reaching this state is not about eliminating every sensation of the storm, but about the nervous system no longer classifying it as danger. The storm continues. The alarm inside does not have to. You have likely noticed your own breathing slow, once a worry finally lost its grip on you. A dog who once needed a prescribed sedative now manages mild storms using only a rap and white noise, though he still gets medication during severe events. Always under his veterinarian's ongoing guidance. Veterinary behaviorists increasingly favor a layered approach. Your own vet helps calibrate, combining tools like counter-conditioning and pressure garments with medication reserved under professional veterinary supervision for the most intense triggers. This model recognizes some dogs carry a genetic or experiential intensity of fear that behavioral tools alone cannot fully address, and that is not a failure of training. There is no single right combination. Only the one a veterinarian helps confirm keeps a particular dog calm and safe. You have likely relied on more than one kind of support during your hardest stretches. No version of it, a lesser one. A dog trained to target a specific mat with a paw touch now walks to that mat, unprompted, at the first distant rumble of thunder. This station, or place command, gives an anxious dog a specific job, rather than an open-ended instruction to simply calm down. A concrete task can redirect attention away from escalating fear. Since the brain has limited capacity to focus on a trained behavior and an anxious spiral at once, practicing the command daily during calm moments builds the memory needed for it to hold under real stress. You have likely reached for a familiar task, folding laundry or tidying a shelf, to steady yourself during an anxious hour. A dog's owner checks a weather app before bed and sees a storm system forming 3 states away. Still, 18 hours from arrival. Modern barometric pressure tracking lets caregivers anticipate a dog's physiological trigger before any visible local weather change, turning once unpredictable panic into a schedulable routine. Some owners now begin calming supplements or white noise based on pressure forecasts rather than waiting for the first clap of thunder. This shift from reactive to anticipatory care mirrors how the dog's own body has been forecasting storms all along, just through pressure-sensitive tissue instead of a screen. You have likely checked a forecast solely to prepare your mood, not just your umbrella. A dog who used to bolt to the farthest corner of the house at the first flash of lightning now walks calmly to her den and closes her eyes before the thunder follows. Everything gathered here. The rap's steady pressure, the hum of white noise, the treat once paired with a sound that meant only fear, has settled into her nervous system one storm at a time. None of it stopped the static from building in the clouds, or the pressure from falling in her inner ear. What changed was quieter and far more lasting. You are also a creature whose body has learned, without your permission, what certain feelings mean before your mind catches up. A dog sleeps through a storm that would have terrified her a year earlier. Her breathing slow, one paw twitching in a dream, unrelated to any weather. There is nothing left to fix here, nothing left to manage. The static she no longer feels as danger is still there in the air, exactly as it was, and so is she, simply resting inside it rather than ruled by it. Let your own breathing find that same unhurried rhythm now. However far any storm of your own might be, whatever pressure has been shifting in you today does not need solving before you rest. It only needs to pass through, the way weather eventually does. A dog does not need thunder to stop existing in order to sleep through it. She only needs her body to stop mistaking the sound for danger. This is the quiet answer this journey has circled since its first rumble. Calm during a storm was never about silencing the sky. Since no rap or scent has ever stopped a cloud from discharging, it was always about changing what a nervous system, canine or human, decides a sensation means. Static charge will keep building before every storm, and pressure will keep falling the same quiet way it always has. The dog who rests easily now still senses all of it. She has simply stopped needing it to mean anything is wrong. A dog leans its full weight against your leg the moment the first far-off rumble reaches the house, not pulling away, just leaning, steady and quiet. Behaviorists call this contact seeking, and studies show sustained contact with a trusted person can measurably lower a dog's cortisol during fear. It is not a request to be saved, but a quiet agreement to be less alone with the sensation. You may know this instinct yourself, the way sitting beside someone can soften a hard moment without a word. Over many storms shared with the same steady person, a dog's trembling often shortens, arriving later and easing sooner than it once did. Researchers call this a shift in learned safety association. The static and pressure still register exactly as before, but what changes is what the sensing means. Once calm repetitions show the fear need not end badly. It resembles how an old worry can lose its grip, not because the situation changed, but because you survived it enough times to half believe you will again. A dog guided calmly through past storms will sometimes glance toward its person before pacing, checking the room's temperature before deciding how afraid to be. Cognition researchers call this social referencing, where an animal reads a trusted figure's face and posture for information about danger. A calm body seems to genuinely register as data, not background noise. Your own steadiness during a storm is being read in real time, much like a room taking its cue from whoever seems least rattled. Even dogs with severe storm anxiety can improve through gradual desensitization, playing recorded storm sounds at very low volume during calm moments and slowly raising them over weeks. Paired with something genuinely pleasant during the sound, the body begins associating noise with ease instead of threat. Progress rarely moves in a straight line, and rushing it can undo weeks of work. There is hope in this. Whatever the body learned to fear, under the right conditions, it can also learn to trust. A dog resting near an open window on a calm evening will sometimes turn toward the coming weather long before any person notices a cloud, ears lifting, entirely at ease. Not every early signal produces distress. Often, heightened sensitivity to pressure and static simply registers as mild noticing rather than fear. Two dogs can detect the identical pressure drop and respond differently, based only on what past storms taught them to expect. Sensing something big does not have to mean bracing for something bad. When a storm passes at night, while a dog is already curled beside its person's bed, the waking response is often milder than a daytime storm of equal intensity. One explanation is proximity. The dog is already touching safety when the static and pressure begin building, skipping the anxious, searching daytime storms, often trigger. It does not have to go find comfort. It is already resting inside it. Fear is easier to meet when you did not have to go looking for what steadies you. A dog that whines softly rather than barking during a storm's peak is, according to vocalization studies, expressing a lower arousal distress than the sharp barking tied to acute panic. These whines fall in a narrower, steadier band, closer to sounds used in puppyhood to summon a caregiver, suggesting the whine is less an alarm than a request. A whining dog is often more receptive to quiet reassurance than a fully panicked one. It is not far from the small sounds people make when overwhelmed, meant for someone nearby to hear. Storm-related cortisol in dogs typically peaks within the first 20 minutes of rising charge and pressure, then declines steadily even as the storm continues. The alarm system appears front-loaded, spending most of its energy on the initial adjustment rather than sustaining maximum arousal throughout. A dog calmer in a storm's second half is not less aware of the weather. Its stress hormones have already done their work. This mirrors how the hardest part of something difficult is often the beginning, before the body settles into enduring it. A young dog raised alongside an older, storm-calm dog often develops milder storm anxiety than one raised without that example. Researchers describe this as emotional contagion working in the gentler direction. Calm, spreading from one animal to another through shared space and mirrored behavior. The younger dog is not taught formally. It simply witnesses, storm after storm, that lying quietly is a viable option. Calm, like fear, can be something one creature passes to another simply by being nearby and unafraid. Dogs given a familiar task during a storm, settling on a mat, working a food puzzle, chewing something known, often show measurably lower distress than dogs left with nothing to occupy them. This works, researchers suggest, by engaging pathways anxiety would otherwise dominate, giving the nervous system somewhere else to direct its energy. The static and pressure are still present, but attention now has somewhere useful to go instead of circling the threat. It resembles the relief of occupied hands, while the mind works through something harder underneath. A dog's tail tends to drop lower and tuck tighter as barometric pressure falls further, tracking a storm's intensity closely enough that some behaviorists use tail position as a rough, real-time read of internal state. The body appears to continuously report what the dog cannot say aloud, adjusting moment by moment as the atmosphere shifts. There is something honest in a body that simply shows what it feels, without needing to be asked. Dogs treated with environmental management, gradual desensitization, and consistent human presence together show more durable improvement than any single approach used alone. This layered strategy addresses fear from several directions at once: physical sensation, learned association, and emotional safety. Rather than expecting one fix to resolve something arriving through several channels, fear built from multiple real inputs seems to respond best to comfort offered from multiple real directions. Much as a hard season rarely resolves through one solution alone. A dog fully recovered from a storm will often seek a slow, unhurried moment of contact, a head on a knee, a lean into a hand, before returning to normal activity. This pause seems distinct from the earlier fear-driven contact seeking. The storm has passed. Cortisol is already falling, and closeness now serves a different purpose. The dog does not need reassurance at this point. It simply wants the closeness a little longer, now that there is nothing left to fear. Owners tracking their own state during a dog's storm anxiety often notice, when asked afterward, that their own tension had risen without them registering it. Mirrored, researchers suggest, by a nervous system responding to a frightened companion nearby. Studies of human-canine cohabitation have found cortisol in owners and dogs sometimes rising and falling together. Calming a dog during a storm is rarely one-directional. The steadiness offered is also, physiologically, steadying something in the person giving it. What began, many facts ago, as a mystery, a dog, trembling before any thunder could be heard, has a precise answer. Rising static across the coat, falling pressure in the sinuses and inner ear, sensed hours before the storm's sound arrives. The fear was never exaggeration, never a flaw in temperament. It was a body accurately reading an environment most humans cannot perceive. What actually helps was never about erasing the sensation. It was about what met that sensation when it arrived. A dog curled against your side on a quiet, storm-free evening is, in a sense, rehearsing the posture it will need on the nights the sky does turn. The same closeness, simply without urgency attached yet Researchers note that these ordinary moments of closeness build the trust that frightened moments later draw on. Rather than trust being created fresh, each time fear arrives. Comfort, it seems, is less an emergency response and more something built slowly, one ordinary evening at a time. When thunder finally rolls in and a dog presses close rather than retreating alone, something is exchanged that goes beyond simple warmth. Researchers describe interspecies comfort-seeking as one of the clearer signs of genuine attachment, distinct from purely instinctive survival behavior, because the dog is choosing a specific, familiar creature rather than merely the nearest shelter. It means the trembling dog pressed against your leg is seeking you. Specifically, there are few clearer forms of trust than choosing exactly where to be afraid. A dog's breathing, once calmed after a storm passes, slows to near its resting rate within minutes. A recovery researchers describe as notably efficient compared to many mammals under comparable stress. The body does not linger in high alert simply because it can. It returns to baseline once the real signal, the charge, the pressure, the sound, has genuinely cleared. The nervous system was never built to hold fear longer than the threat required. Even the static that builds so precisely across a dog's coat before a storm dissipates entirely within moments of rain beginning. Since falling water conducts and grounds, ambient charge almost as fast as it gathered. The very sensation that made a dog's fur prickle simply disappears, physically resolved, rather than merely forgotten. The fear had a beginning, a physical cause, and an equally physical ending. Nothing about its resolution required anything sudden. Only time. A dog sleeping soundly beside you on a clear night carries, somewhere in its body, the same sensory apparatus that will read tomorrow's storm before either of you hears a sound. The same fur, the same inner ear. Tonight, none of it is active. The instrument simply rests. Capable, but quiet. The way any finely tuned system rests until needed again. There is peace in an ability held in reserve, a sensitivity that only announces itself when something real approaches. Long after a specific storm has faded from memory entirely, a dog's body seems to retain something of what happened in that shared moment of fear and comfort. A slightly faster settling next time. A quicker return to trust. Researchers describe this as implicit, procedural memory, closer to how a person's hands remember a skill after the conscious memory of learning it has faded. The storm itself is gone. What it taught the body about safety is not. A dog that startles briefly during a distant storm glances toward its person and settles back to sleep within seconds shows what behaviorists consider a well-regulated stress response. Not the absence of sensitivity, but trust fast enough to override it. The static is still there. The pressure is still falling. And still, the dog chooses rest. Because rest has proven, storm after storm, to be reasonable. It has learned exactly who to trust with what it senses. Somewhere tonight, a storm may be gathering that no person has yet noticed. No darkened sky, no falling barometer, no forecast issued. And in that same house, a dog's coat is already faintly charging, its inner ear already registering the first pressure shift, its body doing the quiet work of reading what is coming. It does not know the word for what it senses. It only knows to move a little closer to whoever it trusts most, before there is any visible reason to. Every storm a dog moves through this way ends the same simple manner, regardless of how loud the thunder or how low the pressure dropped. The charge disperses, the sky clears, and the dog returns to ordinary rest beside the person it chose to be near. Nothing about the fear needed fixing the way a broken object needs fixing. It needed only company, patience, and time for the physical cause to pass through. The dog never doubted the storm would end. It only needed somewhere steady to wait. A dog does not need you to stop the thunder, silence the static in its own fur, or explain the pressure falling through the air. It only needs you to stay close while its body does the old, precise work of sensing a changing sky. You were never asked to be the storm's opposite. You were only ever asked to be near. In choosing, storm after storm, to simply remain, you have given the one thing that has ever truly mattered. Proof it was never facing this alone. We began tonight with a trembling dog and a sky that had not yet spoken. And somewhere, between the static gathering, in fact 42, and the falling pressure, named in fact 43, that trembling stopped looking like fear and started looking like a kind of quiet expertise. A dog does not sense a storm because something is wrong with it. It senses a storm because its body reads the world at a resolution most of us will never access. What helps was never about making that sensitivity smaller. It was always, simply, about not letting it be carried alone. We watched a dog press itself into small spaces, its coat quietly charging, its inner ear reading pressure, long before any rumble reached human hearing. We watched that same dog learn, one storm at a time, that a steady hand nearby could turn an old fear into something survivable. And we watched it return, every time, calm and unhurried, to rest beside the one it trusted most. If tonight's facts gave you something gentler to offer the next trembling dog in your life, let this video keep playing quietly in the background, and let sleep find you exactly the way it finds them, close to someone steady. Rest well, gentle caretaker. And remember, the sky was never something to face alone, for you or for the one curled beside you. Picture the last faint charge lifting off a sleeping dog's fur, dispersing into a sky already going quiet. Picture the pressure in the air, finally settling, the way your own breathing is settling now. Each breath a little slower than the one before it. Nothing left to sense. Nothing left to brace for. Only a warm, familiar weight resting close. and the simple, wordless proof that neither of you had to face the night's changing sky alone. Whatever pressure has been building in your own day can lift now too. The same way static dissolves once rain finally falls. There is nowhere left to be but here. Nothing left to do but let this stillness carry you into sleep. Good night.